Hello Blender users, I have a quick geometry nodes tip for you. Today I'm going to teach you how to control the density of instances on your mesh using a Bezier curve, and it can be all done within geometry nodes. Okay, let's get started. For easy demonstration purposes, I'm only going to use basic shapes here so you can understand the fundamentals of this node setup first. We want to see this terrain, so add in a join geometry node right away. Next, place a point distribute and a point instance node. This is usually the start of any instance spawning node tree. Once we've populated the mesh enough, it's time to use curves. Add in a Bezier curve and go into edit mode. Delete the curve because we are going to draw the curve on with the draw tool. We can see the curve is not snapping to the mesh. So we need to add a shrink wrap modifier. Increase the curve resolution. On our node tree, add an object info node. Select the curve and set it to relative. If you're ever running into problems, make sure you check to see that you select relative on your object info node. Add a curve to mesh node because this method only works with geometry. Next, place an attribute proximity node. Even though the object info node has a geometry output, it doesn't work with a curve object. It needs to see a mesh to work. Plug that into target and change this to points. Create a new attribute for distance and use that attribute in the density field of the point distribute node. You can see that the setup is already working. Adding in an attribute color ramp with both fields set to curve prox, you can have a bit more control, but we need an additional node before. Place an attribute math node and set it to multiply for now. Change B to float. Now you can see the multiply node controls the distance from the curve, and the color ramp can be used to adjust the softness, or it can be used to invert the instance spawning. Picture it like this. The black areas of this image represent 0 and white is 1. If you add a math node like multiply or add, it changes these values. With geometry nodes, the value can go above 1 and it will keep going. You can use a clamp node to control that. And since this is being plugged into the density, it's just saying how many instances can spawn there. Once you have this set up, you can move the curve dynamically and it will adjust. This is the magic of geometry nodes. In this example, I'm going to have a river cut through this forest. I'm using the same nodes we just created over here on the left. On the right is my instance spawning controls. And this node in the middle is just acting as a mask by using a vertex group to have the trees only spawn on the top of the mesh. I just add in a Bezier curve and set the target. Then add in the shrink wrap modifier. Now, just using the draw tool, trees are going to be removed wherever the curve is placed. Using a plane with a curve deform and shrink wrap modifier, I can easily draw a low poly river on top. You can get really creative here. Everything you normally would do with a curve, adding like an array modifier, adding shrink wrap, doing whatever it is you want to do with a curve, you can still do that on the same curve that you're using to control the density of these instances. And it's all procedural. One important thing to remember is the mesh that you're using to instance the points needs to have enough geometry for this to work. Adding in a subdivision modifier to the top of the stack will usually do the trick. Hopefully in the future, the point density node won't need to rely on the mesh density of the underlying object. That's all for today's tip. I hope you found it useful. I personally love not having to use weight paint anymore to do this. It can all be done within geometry nodes, except for a couple modifiers. For more videos, remember to like and subscribe or consider supporting me on Patreon.